the Dyatlov Pass incident, a mountain mystery unsolved in the frigid, unforgiving landscape of the northern Ural Mountains, where the wind howls through jagged peaks and snow blankets the earth in a thick, impenetrable shroud for months on end. There lies a place that has become synonymous with one of the most perplexing and haunting mysteries of the 20th century, known as Dyatlov Pass. This remote stretch of terrain, nestled in the Kalat Siakal mountain range, whose name translates to Dead Mountain in the language of the indigenous Mansi people, was the site of a tragedy that has baffled investigators, historians, and amateur sleuths for over 6 decades. On the night of February 1959, 9 experienced Soviet ski hikers, led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, perished under circumstances so bizarre and unexplained that even the most rigorous official investigations and modern scientific inquiries have failed to provide a definitive answer. Their deaths were not the result of a simple hiking accident, nor were they caused by any obvious natural disaster or human malice, at least none that fits within the bounds of conventional understanding. Instead, the scene left behind by the Dyatlov group painted a picture of chaos, terror, and a desperate fight for survival that ended in a manner S.O. Chinese letter, that it has spawned countless theories, from the plausible to the paranormal, and ensured that the Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries. To understand the full scope of this enigma, we must delve into the details of the expedition, the discovery of the bodies, the conflicting investigations, and the myriad theories that have attempted to explain what happened on that fateful night in the Urals. We must also confront the uncomfortable truth that, despite decades of research, we may never know exactly what drove those 9 young people to cut their way out of their tent in the middle of a blizzard, clad in little more than their underwear, and flee into the frozen wilderness to their deaths. The story of the Dyatlov Pass incident is not just a tale of tragedy. It is a story of human curiosity, resilience, and the limits of our ability to comprehend the unknown forces that can lurk in the most isolated corners of the natural world. It is a mystery that continues to captivate and disturb, a reminder that even in an age of advanced technology and scientific understanding, there are still secrets that the Earth refuses to give up. The origins of the Dyatlov Pass expedition can be traced back to the winter of 1958-1959, a time when the Soviet Union was in the midst of a period of intense social and political change. The country was still recovering from the devastation of World War II, and the government actively promoted outdoor recreation and physical fitness as a way to build a strong, healthy population. Hiking and skiing, particularly in the rugged mountain ranges of the Soviet Union, were seen as not just leisure activities, but as acts of patriotism and a way to cultivate the Soviet spirit, resilience, courage, and a willingness to overcome adversity. It was in this context that a group of students and recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, UPI, in Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg, came together to plan a challenging winter hike through the northern Urals, led by Igor Dyatlov, a promising young engineering student with extensive experience in hiking and mountaineering. The group set out to complete a route that would take them through some of the most remote and harsh terrain in the region. The goal of the expedition was not just to test their physical limits, but also to earn the title of Master of Sports in hiking, a prestigious honor that would recognize their skill and endurance. The group consisted of 8 men and 1 woman, all of whom were experienced hikers with a passion for the outdoors. Their ages ranged from 21 to 37, and each brought a unique set of skills to the expedition. Igor Dyatlov, the leader, was known for his careful planning and calm demeanor. He had led several successful hikes in the past and was widely respected by his peers. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, was a talented skier and a close friend of Dyatlov-S, with a knack for navigating difficult terrain. Yuri Krivonishenko, also 21, was an experienced hiker who had completed several winter expeditions and was known for his cheerful attitude and ability to keep the group morale high. Lyudmila Dubinina, 21, the only woman in the group, was a skilled skier and a dedicated student who had dreamed of completing the Ural hike for years. Alexander Kolvatov, 24, was a geologist who had a deep knowledge of the Ural Mountains and their terrain, making him an invaluable member of the team. Nikolai Thibox-Brignoles, 23, was a French-born Soviet citizen with a background in engineering and a love for adventure. Rustam Slobodin, 23, was a quiet but determined hiker who was known for his physical strength and endurance. Seaman Zolotaryov, 37, the oldest member of the group, was a World War II veteran with extensive military experience and a wealth of survival skills. He had joined the group at the last minute, having met Dyatlov through a mutual friend. The 9th member, Yuri Yudin, 21, was forced to drop out of the expedition just a few days after it began due to severe back pain, a decision that would ultimately save his life. In the days leading up to the expedition, the group spent countless hours preparing for the journey. They packed warm clothing, high-calorie food, skiing equipment, a tent, and other essential supplies. They also meticulously planned their route, studying maps of the northern Urals and consulting with local guides who were familiar with the terrain. The group was well aware of the dangers of winter hiking in the Urals. Temperatures could drop to as low as degrees C, minus 58 degrees F, and blizzards could arise without warning, making navigation nearly impossible. But they were confident in their skills and their preparation, and they set off on their journey with a sense of excitement and determination. On January 23, 1959, the group gathered in dormitory room 530, one of the Ural Polytechnical Institute, ready to begin their adventure. A 10th student Nikolai Popov, was supposed to join them, but missed the train. A twist of fate that would spare him from the tragedy to come. Zolotaryov, who had been introduced to Dyatlov through another hiker, joined the group at the train station that evening, bumping their number from 9 to 10 before Yudin's departure. They were a little late arriving at the train station and had to run with all their gear and supplies, but they made their train and settled in, much to their delight. Another group from UPI, led by Yuri Blinov, was in the same car and would be traveling with them as far as Vizhay. Though the two groups didn't share the same ultimate goal, Dyatlov's group was heading for Mount Ottorn. The two groups stayed up until the wee hours of the morning, chatting and having fun, and eventually they settled in and went to sleep. The next day, January 24, the train arrived at the town of Serov, 201 miles, 324 km, north of Sverdlovsk, at 7 a.m. In 1959, there was a 12-hour delay between trains in Serov, and because of the early hour, the group was not allowed into the train station's sitting room. Krivonishenko, happy to be with friends he hadn't seen in a while and giddy with the thought of adventure, began singing, nearly getting arrested by a nearby policeman who claimed he was disturbing the peace. Eventually, he was released without being charged. Exhausted from their night of traveling, the group knocked on the door of a nearby school, simply known as School 41, and asked if they could rest there. The school's headmaster, sympathetic to their cause, allowed them to use a classroom for the day, where they napped and prepared for the next leg of their journey. Over the next few days, the group continued their journey north, traveling by train and then by truck to the village of Vizhay, the last inhabited settlement before they entered the wilderness. In Vizhay, they spent a few days resting, resupplying, and gathering information about the terrain from local Mansi hunters. The Mansi, who had lived in the Urals for centuries, warned the group about the dangers of Khalat Syakhl, telling them that the mountain was cursed and that strange things had been seen there. But the group, dismissive of local legends, brushed off the warnings and prepared to set off into the mountains. On January 27, 1959, the group left Vizhay and began their hike into the Urals. They traveled by skis, pulling sleds loaded with their supplies, and made steady progress through the snow-covered terrain. For the first few days, everything went according to plan. The weather was cold but clear, and the group made good time, setting up camp each night in a new location. They kept detailed diaries and took numerous photographs, documenting their journey and their experiences. In their diaries, they wrote of the beauty of the Urals, the challenges of the hike, and their excitement about reaching their destination. They also noted that the snow cover was thinner than expected, which they initially saw as a positive, as it would make skiing easier. But as they ventured deeper into the mountains, the weather began to change. The wind picked up, and snowfall became more frequent, making visibility difficult. On January 31, the group reached the foot of Khalat Syakhl, a mountain that stood 1,079 meters, 3,540 feet tall. Although not particularly high by mountain standards, Khalat-Syakhl was known for its harsh weather and treacherous terrain. The group had planned to climb over the mountain and set up camp on the other side, but the worsening weather forced them to change their plans. Instead, they decided to set up camp on the eastern slope of the mountain, in a relatively sheltered area that they hoped would protect them from the wind and snow. Little did they know that this decision would seal their fate. That evening, the group set up their tent, dug a shallow snow trench around it to provide additional protection from the wind, and settled in for the night. They cooked a meal, shared stories, and prepared for the next day's hike. According to their diaries, they were in good spirits, despite the cold and the worsening weather. They had no way of knowing that within a few hours, they would be fleeing their tent in terror, clad in little more than their underwear, and heading toward a gruesome death in the frozen wilderness. The last entry in any of the group's diaries was made by Igor Dyatlov on January 31, 1959. It read, "We have set up camp on the slope of Khalat-Syakhl. The weather is bad, wind is strong, snow is falling. We are tired but safe. Tomorrow, we will continue our journey." Those were the last known words written by any member of the Dyatlov group. What happened next remains a mystery. When the Dyatlov group failed to return to Sverdlovsk as scheduled, concern began to grow among their friends and family. The group had planned to complete their hike by February 12, 1959, and return to the city to celebrate the end of their expedition. When February 12 came and went with no word from the hikers, their loved ones grew increasingly worried. Initially, the authorities were reluctant to launch a search, dismissing the delay as a common occurrence in winter hiking. Blizzards and other weather conditions often forced hikers to delay their return. But as the days passed and still no word came, pressure mounted on the government to take action. On February 20, 1959, more than 2 weeks after the group was last heard from, a formal search was launched. The search team consisted of over 200 volunteers, including fellow students from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, local Mansi hunters, and Soviet military personnel. The search area was vast and treacherous, covered in deep snow and subject to frequent blizzards. For days, the search team combed the mountains, following the group's intended route and looking for any sign of the hikers. It was not until February 26, 1959, that the first clues were found. A search party led by Mikhail Sherevin, a student at UPI, discovered the group's abandoned tent on the eastern slope of Khalat-Syakhl. What they found there was nothing short of bizarre. The tent was partially collapsed and covered in snow. But what struck the searchers most was the way it had been damaged. It had been cut open from the inside with a knife. The tent was still filled with the group's belongings: warm clothing, food, skiing equipment, cameras, and the hikers' diaries. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints of an intruder, and no indication that the group had left voluntarily. It was as if they had fled in a state of panic, leaving behind everything they needed to survive the harsh winter conditions. Outside the tent, the searchers found a trail of footprints leading down the slope. The footprints were made by bare feet or socks, with no sign of boots or ski equipment. The trail was relatively straight, suggesting that the hikers were moving quickly, but not randomly. The footprints led down the slope for about 1.5 kilometers, 0.9 miles, before disappearing in the deep snow. Following the trail, the searchers soon made a grim discovery: the bodies of two of the hikers, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, lying near the banks of a small stream. The two men were clad in only their underwear, and their bodies were frozen solid. Nearby, there were the remains of a small campfire, and several branches had been broken off a nearby cedar tree, as if the men had been trying to build a fire to keep warm. The searchers noted that the men's hands were badly frostbitten, and that there were burns on their bodies, likely from the fire. Autopsies later revealed that Doroshenko and Krivonishenko had died of hypothermia, but their injuries suggested that they had fought valiantly to survive. Doroshenko was found wearing a vest, a short-sleeved shirt, knit pants, badly ripped with one large hole on the right side, and a smaller hole on the left side, as well as tears on the inside of the thighs, shorts over his pants, and a pair of wool socks. The left one was burned. His injuries included burned hair on the right side of his head, ears, nose, and lips covered in blood, a bruised right armpit, 2 abrasions on the surface of his right shoulder with no tissue bleeding, bruises on the right forearm, torn skin on fingers of both hands, bruised skin on both thighs, frostbite on his face and ears, and a foamy gray discharge from his mouth on his right cheek, a detail that some doctors later suggested could have been caused by pressure on his chest cavity, similar to what was seen in interrogations by Stalin's secret police, the NKVD, or from a fall from a tree. Krivonishenko was found wearing a shirt, a long-sleeved shirt, swimming pants, and a torn sock on his left foot. His clothes showed heightened levels of radiation, a detail that would later fuel numerous conspiracy theories. He had helped clean up after the Kishtim accident in 1957, a nuclear disaster that had been covered up by the Soviet government. But it was highly unlikely that any remnants of radiation would have remained on his clothes 2 years later. His injuries included bruises on his forehead and around the left temporal bone, diffuse bleeding in the right temporal and occipital region due to damage to the temporalis muscle, a missing tip of his nose, frostbitten ears, bruises on the right side of his chest, bruises on his hands, detachment of the epidermis on the back of the left hand, a portion of the epidermis from the right hand found in his mouth, bruises and minor scratches on the thighs, a bruise on the left buttock, and bruises and burns on the left leg. Like Doroshenko, his official cause of death was hypothermia. Over the next few days, the searchers found 3 more bodies: Igor Dyatlov, Lyudmila Dubinina, and Rustam Slobodin. These 3 were found lying between the tent and the stream along the trail of footprints. They were also clad in minimal clothing, and their bodies showed signs of hypothermia. Dyatlov was wearing an unbuttoned fur coat with pockets, a sweater, a long-sleeved shirt, which had belonged to Yudin, who had given it to Doroshenko. Presumably, Dyatlov got the shirt from Doroshenko's corpse. Ski pants over his pants, a woolen sock on his right foot, and a cotton sock on his left foot. His injuries included minor abrasions on the forehead, abrasions above the left eyebrow, dried blood on his lips, a missing incisor on the lower jaw, determined to have happened long before the 1959 trip. Many small scratches on the right forearm and palm, and bruises on the metacarpals. Dubinina, the only woman in the group, was found wearing a jacket and pants, but her clothing was insufficient to protect her from the extreme cold. Her body showed signs of severe frostbite, and autopsies later revealed that she had died of hypothermia. Slobodin was found wearing a sweater and pants, and his body also showed signs of hypothermia, as well as a small crack in his skull, though this injury was not considered fatal. The search for the remaining 4 hikers, Alexander Kolvatov, Nikolay Thibox-Brignoles, Seaman Zolotaryov, and Lyudmila Dubinina, who was initially missing, continued for several weeks. The weather remained harsh, and the search team faced numerous challenges, including blizzards and deep snow. It was not until May 4, 1959, nearly 3 months after the tragedy, that the bodies of the last 4 hikers were found. They were discovered in a shallow snowdrift at the bottom of a ravine, about 75 meters, 246 feet, from the stream where Doroshenko and Krivonishenko had been found. These 4 bodies were in a far worse state than the first 5. Unlike the others, who had died of hypothermia, these 4 had died from severe physical trauma. Thibox-Brignoles had a fractured skull, while Dubinina and Zolotaryov had severe chest trauma, including broken ribs and collapsed lungs. Kolvatov had a small crack in his skull and minor chest injuries. What made these injuries even more puzzling was that there were no signs of external bleeding or bruising that would suggest a struggle. The trauma appeared to be the result of a powerful, blunt force, but there was no indication of what had caused it. Additionally, the bodies of the 4 hikers had been partially eaten by animals, and 3 of them had damaged soft tissue of the head and face. 2 of the bodies had missing eyes, 1 had a missing tongue, and 1 had missing eyebrows. These details led to widespread speculation that the hikers had been attacked by some kind of wild animal, but there were no animal tracks or other evidence to support this theory. The autopsies of the 9 hikers revealed several other strange details. All of the bodies had high levels of carbon monoxide in their blood, suggesting that they had been exposed to smoke from a fire before their deaths. However, the campfire near Doroshenko and Krivonishenko was small and would not have produced enough smoke to cause such high levels of carbon monoxide. Additionally, the bodies of several hikers had unusual discoloration, with their skin turning a dark brown or orange, a phenomenon that is not typical of hypothermia. The autopsy reports also noted that the hikers' internal organs were in good condition, with no signs of disease or poisoning. The only exception was Krivonishenko, whose clothes had elevated levels of radiation, as previously mentioned. The discovery of the bodies raised more questions than it answered. Why had the group cut their way out of their tent from the inside? Why had they fled into the frozen wilderness without their warm clothing or ski equipment? What had caused the severe physical trauma to the last 4 hikers? And why had 3 of the bodies been missing eyes, a tongue, and eyebrows? These questions would haunt investigators for decades to come. The official investigation into the Dyatlov Pass incident was launched shortly after the discovery of the first bodies. Led by Lev Ivanov, a senior investigator with the Sverdlovsk Regional Prosecutor's Office, the investigation was tasked with determining the cause of the hikers' deaths and uncovering what had happened on the night of February 12, 1959. Ivanov was an experienced investigator with a reputation for thoroughness, but he soon found himself faced with a case that defied all logical explanation. The investigation began with a detailed examination of the crime scene, the abandoned tent, and the area where the bodies were found. Ivanov and his team collected evidence, including the hikers' belongings, photographs, diaries, and the tent itself. They also interviewed members of the search team, local Mansi hunters, and anyone else who might have information about the expedition. The initial theory was that the group had been attacked by a wild animal, such as a bear or a wolverine. But this theory was quickly dismissed, as there were no animal tracks near the tent or the bodies, and the injuries to the hikers did not match those typically caused by animal attacks. Another early theory was that the group had been caught in an avalanche. The slope where the tent was set up was relatively steep, and avalanches are common in the Urals during the winter. But again, there was no evidence to support this theory. There were no signs of an avalanche in the area, no debris, no disturbed snow, and no damage to the surrounding trees. Additionally, the tent was still standing, albeit partially collapsed, which would not have been the case if an avalanche had hit it. The search team also noted that the snow around the tent was relatively undisturbed, suggesting that no avalanche had occurred. As the investigation progressed, Ivanov and his team began to consider other possibilities. They looked into the possibility that the group had been attacked by humans, perhaps local Mansi hunters or fugitive criminals. The Mansi people had a history of conflicts with outsiders, and some investigators speculated that the hikers might have inadvertently trespassed on sacred Mansi land, leading to a violent confrontation. But again, there was no evidence to support this theory. The Mansi hunters who participated in the search denied any involvement, and there were no signs of a struggle or human footprints other than those of the hikers and the search team. Additionally, the injuries to the hikers were not consistent with a human attack. There were no stab wounds, gunshot wounds, or other signs of violence that would suggest a fight. Another theory that was considered was that the group had fallen victim to a military accident. The northern Urals were a restricted area in the 1950s, used by the Soviet military for weapons testing, including nuclear and missile tests. Some investigators speculated that the hikers might have witnessed a secret military test, such as a missile launch or a nuclear explosion, and that they had been killed by the military to cover up the incident. This theory was fueled by the discovery of radiation on Krivonishenko's clothes, as well as reports from local residents who claimed to have seen strange lights in the sky on the night of the tragedy. However, the Soviet government denied any military activity in the area at the time, and there was no evidence to link the hikers' deaths to a military test. Ivanov's investigation also looked into the possibility that the group had suffered from some kind of psychological breakdown or panic attack. Perhaps they had been startled by a loud noise or a strange sight, causing them to flee their tent in terror. This could explain why they had cut their way out of the tent and left behind their warm clothing. But what would have caused such a severe panic? There were no signs of an intruder, and the weather, while harsh, was not unusual for the region. The group was experienced and had been trained to handle difficult situations, so a simple panic attack seemed unlikely. As the investigation dragged on, Ivanov and his team became increasingly frustrated. They had collected a great deal of evidence, but none of it pointed to a clear cause of death. The only conclusion they could reach was that the hikers had died as a result of a compelling natural force, a vague term that essentially meant they had no idea what had happened. In May 1959, the official investigation was closed, with the final report stating that the hikers had died due to hypothermia and physical trauma caused by an unknown natural event. The area around Dyatlov Pass was closed to skiers and other adventurers for 3 years following the incident, presumably to prevent further deaths and to avoid any additional scrutiny of the area. The official explanation was met with widespread skepticism. The families of the hikers refused to accept that their loved ones had died due to a compelling natural force, and many people believed that the Soviet government was covering up the true cause of the tragedy. Over the years, numerous inconsistencies in the official investigation have been uncovered. For example, some of the evidence collected at the crime scene went missing, including photographs and diary entries. Witnesses have come forward claiming that they were pressured by the government to change their testimonies, and some have even claimed that the bodies were moved from their original location before the investigation began. Additionally, the autopsy reports were incomplete and contained several contradictions, leading many to believe that they were tampered with. In 2019, the Russian government reopened the investigation into the Dyatlov Pass incident in response to public pressure and new evidence that had emerged over the years. The new investigation, led by Andrei Karyakov, deputy head of the regional prosecutor's office, aimed to re-examine all the evidence and consider all possible theories. After a year of investigation, the team concluded that the most likely cause of the tragedy was an avalanche. The investigators argued that the group had dug a shallow snow trench around their tent to protect it from the wind, which had destabilized the snow above them. A small avalanche had then occurred, partially burying the tent and causing the hikers to panic and cut their way out. The hikers had then fled into the wilderness, where they had become disoriented and died of hypothermia and physical trauma. Karyakov stated that it was a heroic struggle. There was no panic, but they had no chance to save themselves under the circumstances. However, this new conclusion was also met with skepticism. Many experts argued that the slope where the tent was set up was not steep enough to cause an avalanche, and that there was no evidence of an avalanche at the scene. Additionally, the injuries to the last 4 hikers, severe chest trauma, and a fractured skull could not be explained by an avalanche, as avalanche victims typically suffer from crush injuries, not blunt force trauma. The reopened investigation also failed to address many of the lingering questions, such as the radiation on Krivonishenko's clothes, the missing eyes and tongue of some of the bodies, and the high levels of carbon monoxide in the hikers' blood. As a result, the 2020 conclusion did little to put an end to the speculation surrounding the Dyatlov Pass incident. Today, the official cause of death remains listed as compelling natural force, and the mystery continues to defy explanation. In the decades since the tragedy, countless theories have been proposed to explain what happened to the Dyatlov group. These theories range from the plausible to the paranormal, and each has its own set of supporters and detractors. While none of these theories have been proven definitively, they all offer possible explanations for the bizarre events of that fateful night. One of the most widely accepted theories is the avalanche theory, which was the conclusion of the 2020 reopened investigation. Proponents of this theory argue that the group's decision to dig a shallow snow trench around their tent destabilized the snowpack above them, leading to a small avalanche. The avalanche partially buried the tent, causing the hikers to panic and cut their way out. The hikers then fled down the slope, hoping to find shelter, but became disoriented in the blizzard and died of hypothermia. The physical trauma to the last 4 hikers, proponents argue, was caused by falling debris from the avalanche or by the hikers falling into the ravine. However, there are several flaws in this theory. First, the slope where the tent was set up was relatively gentle, only about 30 degrees, which is not steep enough to trigger an avalanche, especially given the thin snow cover noted in the hikers' diaries. Second, there were no signs of an avalanche at the scene, no debris, no disturbed snow, and no damage to the surrounding trees. Third, the injuries to the last 4 hikers were not consistent with avalanche injuries. Avalanche victims typically suffer from crush injuries, broken bones, and internal bleeding, but the hikers' injuries were caused by a powerful, blunt force, which is more consistent with a fall from a great height or a collision with a heavy object. Another popular theory is the katabatic wind theory. Katabatic winds are strong, cold winds that descend from mountain peaks, often reaching speeds of over 100 kilometers per hour, 62 miles per hour. These winds can be extremely powerful, capable of knocking people off their feet and destroying tents. Proponents of this theory argue that a sudden katabatic wind struck the Dyatlov group's tent, causing it to collapse and terrifying the hikers. The hikers, fearing for their lives, cut their way out of the tent and fled down the slope, where they were overcome by the cold and died of hypothermia. The physical trauma to the last 4 hikers, proponents suggest, was caused by being blown into trees or rocks by the wind. This theory has some merit, as katabatic winds are common in the Urals. However, there are also flaws. While katabatic winds are powerful, they would not have caused the severe chest trauma and fractured skull seen in the last 4 hikers. Additionally, the trail of footprints left by the hikers was relatively straight, suggesting that they were moving under their own power, not being blown by the wind. Another theory that has gained traction over the years is the infrasound theory. Infrasound is sound waves with frequencies below the range of human hearing, and it is known to cause feelings of fear, anxiety, and even panic in humans. Proponents of this theory argue that the Dyatlov group was exposed to powerful infrasound, possibly caused by the wind passing over the mountain peaks, which triggered a state of extreme panic. The hikers, overcome by fear, cut their way out of their tent and fled into the wilderness, where they died of hypothermia. This theory could explain why the group fled without their warm clothing. They were in a state of irrational panic and were not thinking clearly. However, there is no direct evidence that infrasound was present in the area at the time of the tragedy, and it is unclear whether infrasound alone could cause such a severe reaction. The military testing theory is one of the most popular conspiracy theories surrounding the Dyatlov Pass incident. Proponents of this theory argue that the hikers witnessed a secret Soviet military test, such as a missile launch, a nuclear explosion, or a test of a new weapon, and that they were killed by the military to cover up the incident. This theory is fueled by several pieces of evidence. The radiation found on Krivonishenko's clothes, reports from local residents who saw strange lights in the sky on the night of the tragedy, and the fact that the area was a restricted military zone. Some proponents even suggest that the hikers were killed by an experimental weapon, such as a sonic weapon or a chemical weapon, which could explain the strange injuries and the high levels of carbon monoxide in their blood. However, there is no concrete evidence to support this theory. The Soviet government denied any military activity in the area at the time, and no records of secret military tests have been found. Additionally, the radiation on Krivonishenko's clothes could have come from other sources, such as the Kishtim accident, which he had helped clean up 2 years earlier. Another conspiracy theory is that the hikers were attacked by a group of Mansi hunters. The Mansi people had a history of conflicts with outsiders. and some investigators believe that the hikers might have trespassed on sacred Mansi land, leading to a violent confrontation. Proponents of this theory point to the missing eyes, tongue, and eyebrows of some of the bodies, which they claim were ritualistic mutilations performed by the Mansi. However, there is no evidence to support this theory. The Mansi hunters who participated in the search denied any involvement, and there were no signs of a struggle or human footprints other than those of the hikers and the search team. Additionally, the Mansi people did not practice ritualistic mutilation, and the missing body parts are more likely the result of animal scavenging. The paranormal theory is perhaps the most controversial and least supported of all the theories. Proponents of this theory argue that the hikers were killed by supernatural forces, such as a UFO, a Yeti abominable snowman, or a time vortex. This theory is fueled by reports of strange lights in the sky on the night of the tragedy, as well as the bizarre nature of the hikers' deaths. Some proponents even claim that the hikers were abducted by aliens, and that their bodies were returned to Earth with strange injuries. However, there is no scientific evidence to support any of these claims, and the paranormal theory is widely dismissed by mainstream investigators and scientists. Another theory is that the group suffered from a collective psychological breakdown, possibly caused by a combination of extreme cold, fatigue, and isolation. Proponents of this theory argue that the hikers, overcome by the harsh conditions and the isolation of the mountains, began to hallucinate and lose their minds. They cut their way out of the tent in a state of delirium and fled into the wilderness, where they died of hypothermia. This theory could explain why the group left behind their warm clothing and why they were moving in a disoriented manner. However, the group was experienced and had been trained to handle difficult situations, so a collective psychological breakdown seems unlikely. Additionally, the severe physical trauma to the last 4 hikers cannot be explained by a psychological breakdown. There is also the theory that the group was killed by a combination of factors. For example, they might have been caught in a blizzard, which caused them to become disoriented and flee their tent. They then fell into a ravine, causing the physical trauma, and died of hypothermia. This theory attempts to combine several of the more plausible theories, but it still fails to explain all of the details of the tragedy, such as the radiation on Krivonishenko's clothes and the missing body parts. Each of these theories has its own strengths and weaknesses, but none of them can fully explain the bizarre events of the Dyatlov Pass incident. The mystery remains unsolved, and it is likely that it will continue to baffle investigators for years to come. To fully appreciate the enigma of the Dyatlov Pass incident, it is important to examine the key details and inconsistencies that have fueled the mystery for decades. These details, which have been uncovered through years of research and investigation, paint a picture of a tragedy that defies all logical explanation. One of the most puzzling details is the way the tent was cut open from the inside. The tent was a high-quality, durable tent designed for winter hiking, and it would have provided adequate protection from the wind and snow. The fact that the hikers cut their way out of the tent with a knife suggests that they were in a state of extreme panic and had no time to unzip the door. But what would have caused such a panic? There were no signs of an intruder, no animal tracks, and no evidence of a natural disaster, such as an avalanche. The only possible explanation is that the hikers were fleeing from something inside or outside the tent that terrified them beyond reason. Another puzzling detail is the fact that the hikers fled into the wilderness without their warm clothing or ski equipment. Temperature on the night of the tragedy was between -25 degrees C and -30 degrees C, -13 degrees F, and -22 degrees F, and wind speeds were high, making exposure to the cold fatal within minutes. The group was experienced and knew the dangers of the cold, so it is unlikely that they would have voluntarily left their warm clothing behind. This suggests that they were in such a state of panic that they did not stop to grab their clothes before fleeing. The trail of footprints left by the hikers is another key detail. The footprints were made by bare feet or socks, with no sign of boots or ski equipment. The trail was relatively straight, suggesting that the hikers were moving quickly, but not randomly. The footprints led down the slope for about 1.5 kilometers before disappearing in the deep snow. This suggests that the hikers were moving with a purpose, perhaps trying to reach a specific location, such as a shelter or a source of water. However, there was no shelter or water source in the area, and the hikers would have known this. The injuries to the hikers are also a major source of confusion. The first 5 hikers to be found died of hypothermia, but their bodies showed signs of frostbite, burns, and minor injuries, suggesting that they had fought valiantly to survive. The last 4 hikers died of severe physical trauma, including a fractured skull and broken ribs, but there were no signs of external bleeding or bruising that would suggest a struggle. The trauma appeared to be the result of a powerful, blunt force, but there was no indication of what had caused it. Additionally, 3 of the bodies had missing eyes, a tongue, and eyebrows, which has led to widespread speculation about ritualistic mutilation or animal scavenging. The high levels of carbon monoxide in the hikers' blood is another puzzling detail. All of the bodies had elevated levels of carbon monoxide, suggesting that they had been exposed to smoke from a fire before their deaths. However, the campfire near Doroshenko and Krivonishenko was small and would not have produced enough smoke to cause such high levels of carbon monoxide. This suggests that the hikers were exposed to smoke from another source, possibly a military test or a chemical reaction. The radiation found on Krivonishenko's clothes is another key detail that has fueled conspiracy theories. The levels of radiation were not extremely high, but they were higher than normal. Krivonishenko had helped clean up after the Kishtim accident in 1957, a nuclear disaster that had been covered up by the Soviet government. However, it is highly unlikely that any remnants of radiation would have remained on his clothes 2 years later. This suggests that the radiation came from another source, possibly a secret military test. The photographs taken by the hikers also provide some clues, but they also raise more questions. The last photograph taken by the group shows the tent set up on the slope of Khalat Siakal, with the hikers standing nearby. The photograph is slightly blurred, suggesting that it was taken in a hurry. There's also a strange light in the background of the photograph, which some have claimed is a UFO or a military missile. However, the light could also be a reflection or a natural phenomenon, such as the aurora borealis. The diaries kept by the hikers are another important source of information. The last entry was made by Igor Dyatlov on January 31, 1959, and it suggests that the group was in good spirits and had no indication of the tragedy to come. The diaries also note that the snow cover was thinner than expected, which would have made skiing easier, but also less stable. There are no entries that suggest the group was in danger or that they had encountered anything unusual. The inconsistencies in the official investigation are also a major source of suspicion. Some of the evidence collected at the crime scene went missing, including photographs and diary entries. Witnesses have come forward claiming that they were pressured by the government to change their testimonies, and some have even claimed that the bodies were moved from their original location before the investigation began. Additionally, the autopsy reports were incomplete and contained several contradictions, leading many to believe that they were tampered with. The fact that the area around Dyatlov Pass was closed to skiers and other adventurers for 3 years following the incident also fuels suspicion. Many people believe that the Soviet government was trying to cover up the true cause of the tragedy and prevent any additional scrutiny of the area. Another key detail is the role of Seaman Zolotaryov, the oldest member of the group. Zolotaryov was a World War II veteran with extensive military experience, and he had joined the group at the last minute. Some investigators believe that Zolotaryov had a secret mission, possibly related to the Soviet military, and that his presence in the group was not accidental. They speculate that Zolotaryov's mission might have been related to the military testing in the area, and that the hikers' deaths were a result of this mission gone wrong. However, there is no evidence to support this claim, and Zolotaryov's family has denied that he had any secret mission. The funerals of the hikers also provide some interesting details. On May 12, 1959, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolvatov, and Nikolay Thiboksberg-Knowles were buried in Mikhailovsko Cemetery, in a plot designated to the Ural Polytechnical Institute. Seaman Zolotaryov's funeral was delayed a few days, so his mother could attend. She had to travel from Krasnodar to Sverdlovsk. Zolotaryov, who was not a UPI student, was buried in Ivanovsko Cemetery, where Yuri Krivonishenko had been buried on March 9. Zolotaryov had no relatives or friends in Sverdlovsk, and it was So Grin who identified his belongings. Before joining the Dyatlov group, Zolotaryov had enlisted in Sogrin's group for a trek to the circumpolar Urals that would have lasted 25 days. Zolotaryov needed the title of Master of Sports, which would have increased his pay, and this trek could have given him the qualification. Sogrin described him as a very open, outgoing, polite man with good communication skills, which is expected for a guide. Zolotaryov explained to Sogrin that he had found a shorter trek, 15 days, and that Igor Dyatlov had accepted him into the group. He apologized for the situation and explained that he had family reasons. He wanted to take his mother to the Caucasus before the start of the tourist season when he would be busy. Zolotaryov's mother came from Krasnodar to Sverdlovsk to collect his belongings in April, as she had been told to, before her son's body was found. It is known that she was not in Sverdlovsk in May when the bodies arrived, and it is likely that the authorities guessed the body was Zolotaryov's by process of elimination. All known photographs of Zolotaryov that can be used for superimposition are from 1943, after the war. A recent exhumation of Zolotaryov's body on April 12, 2018, was preceded by a year of effort to obtain a permit, since there was no record of Seaman Zolotaryov being buried in Ivanovsko Cemetery or anywhere else in Sverdlovsk. This lack of records has fueled speculation that Zolotaryov's death was part of a larger cover-up. The exhumation of Zolotaryov's body in 2018 also provided some new clues. Forensic experts examined the body and found that Zolotaryov had suffered from a fractured skull and severe chest trauma, similar to the other 3 hikers found in the ravine. They also found that his clothes had elevated levels of radiation, though not as high as Krivonishenko's. However, the exhumation did not provide any definitive answers, and it only added to the mystery. Another key detail is the parallel between the Dyatlov Pass incident and a similar tragedy that occurred in the Anaris Mountains in Sweden in 1978. Almost 20 years after the Dyatlov tragedy, a group of hikers in Sweden encountered a sudden storm with temperatures around degrees C, 5 degrees F, and wind speeds of around 6 ms, creating a cooling effect of around degrees C, minus 58 degrees F. The group hastily tried to seek protection in a shallow ditch along the trail, but the shelter was too shallow, and its top cover was repeatedly blown off. 3 more people joined the shelter, making 9 people in total, and they fought for survival. Unable to fit inside the crowded and snow-blocked entrance, they eventually wandered out apathetically in the storm. Only one survived, though he lost all his extremities. The similarity between this incident and the Dyatlov Pass incident is striking. Both involved groups of 9 hikers caught in sudden, severe weather, fleeing their shelter and dying of hypothermia. However, the Dyatlov group was far from any helping hands, which meant that none of them survived. This parallel suggests that the Dyatlov group might have been caught in a similar sudden storm, which caused them to flee their tent in panic. However, this still does not explain the severe physical trauma to the last 4 hikers. All of these details and inconsistencies combine to create a mystery that is nearly impossible to solve. Each new clue raises more questions, and each theory has its own flaws. The Dyatlov Pass incident is a reminder that even in an age of advanced technology and scientific understanding, there are still secrets that the Earth refuses to give up. Over the years, the Dyatlov Pass incident has become a cultural phenomenon, inspiring countless books, documentaries, movies, and works of art. It has captivated the imagination of people around the world, and it has become a symbol of the unknown and the unexplained. The story of the 9 hikers who died in the frozen Urals has been told and retold, each time with new theories and new interpretations. One of the most famous books about the Dyatlov Pass incident is Dead Mountain, the untold true story of the Dyatlov Pass incident by Donnie Eichar. Published in 2013, this book is the result of years of research by Eichar, who traveled to the Urals and interviewed survivors, investigators, and local residents. Eichar's book presents a detailed account of the expedition, the discovery of the bodies, and the investigation, and it proposes a new theory, that the hikers were killed by a combination of infrasound and a sudden storm. While Eichar's theory is not widely accepted, his book has helped to bring the mystery to a wider audience. Another popular book is The Dyatlov Pass Incident, the most controversial mystery of the 20th century, by Keith McCloskey, published in 2015. This book examines all of the major theories surrounding the incident and provides a detailed analysis of the evidence. McCloskey argues that the official investigation was flawed and that the true cause of the hikers' deaths was a military accident. The Dyatlov Pass incident has also been the subject of several documentaries. One of the most popular is the Dyatlov Pass Incident, 2013, a found footage horror movie that fictionalizes the events of the tragedy. While the movie is not based on fact, it has helped to popularize the mystery and introduce it to a new generation. Another documentary is Dyatlov Pass, The Untold Story, 2015, which features interviews with experts and reenactments of the events. This documentary presents a balanced view of the mystery, examining all of the major theories and leaving it up to the viewer to decide what happened. In addition to books and documentaries, the Dyatlov Pass incident has inspired numerous works of art, including paintings, sculptures, and music. Artists have been drawn to the tragedy because of its mysterious and haunting nature, and their works often reflect the sense of fear, confusion, and loss that surrounds the incident. The Dyatlov Pass incident has also become a popular topic among amateur sleuths and online communities. There are numerous websites, forums, and social media groups dedicated to discussing the mystery and sharing new theories and evidence. These communities have played an important role in keeping the mystery alive and in uncovering new details that were missed by official investigators. For example, in recent years, amateur researchers have uncovered new photographs and diary entries that were not included in the official investigation. And they H-A-V-E Chinese letter new theories based on this evidence. Despite the passage of over 6 decades, interest in the Dyatlov Pass incident shows no signs of fading. New theories continue to be proposed, and new evidence continues to be uncovered. In 2021, a team of scientists from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne published a study in the journal Communications, Earth and Environment that supported the avalanche theory. The scientists built a computer model of the slope where the tent was set up and simulated a small avalanche. They found that the avalanche would have been small enough to not leave any obvious signs, but powerful enough to partially bury the tent and cause the hikers to panic. The scientists also found that the physical trauma to the hikers could be explained by the avalanche debris, and the hikers fall into the ravine. However, this study has also been criticized by experts who argue that the model is based on assumptions that are not supported by the evidence. The scientists assumed that the snow cover was thicker than the hikers noted in their diaries, and they did not account for the fact that there were no signs of an avalanche at the scene. Despite this, the study has added a new layer to the debate and has reignited interest in the avalanche theory. Another recent development is the exhumation of the bodies of Igor Dyatlov and Lyudmila Dubinina in 2023. Forensic experts examined the bodies and found new evidence that suggests that the hikers were killed by a powerful blow to the head and chest, possibly from a falling object or a collision with a rock. However, the experts were unable to determine what caused the blow, and the exhumation did not provide any definitive answers. The exhumation did, however, confirm that the bodies had high levels of carbon monoxide, which supports the theory that the hikers were exposed to smoke before their deaths. The Dyatlov Pass incident has also had a significant impact on the local community in the Urals. The area around Dyatlov Pass has become a popular tourist destination, with many people traveling to the site to pay their respects to the hikers and to try to solve the mystery. The local government has even built a memorial to the 9 hikers, which includes a plaque with their names and a brief description of the tragedy. The Mansi people, who have lived in the area for centuries, have also been affected by the incident. The Mansi consider Khalat Siakal to be a sacred mountain, and they believe that the tragedy was a result of the hikers violating the mountain's sacredness. The Mansi have also been the subject of unfair speculation and accusations, which has strained their relationship with the outside world. Despite this, the Mansi continue to live in the area and to maintain their traditional way of life. The legacy of the Dyatlov Pass incident is a complex one. It is a story of tragedy, loss, and human resilience, but it is also a story of mystery and intrigue. The 9 hikers who died in the Urals were young, talented, and full of hope, and their deaths have left a lasting impact on their families, friends, and the world. The mystery of what happened to them continues to captivate and disturb, and it serves as a reminder that even in the most advanced age, there are still things that we cannot explain. As we look to the future, it is possible that new technology and new research will finally uncover the truth about the Dyatlov Pass incident. Perhaps a new theory will emerge that explains all of the details and inconsistencies, or perhaps new evidence will be found that solves the mystery once and for all. But until then, the Dyatlov Pass incident will remain one of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries, a haunting reminder of the power of nature, the fragility of human life, and the limits of our understanding. The 9 hikers who died on that fateful night in the Urals deserve to have their story told, and they deserve to have the truth uncovered. Until that day comes, the mystery of Dyatlov Pass will continue to intrigue and inspire, a testament to the enduring power of the unknown. To further explore the depths of the Dyatlov Pass incident, it is essential to examine the personal lives of the hikers and the context in which they lived. Each of the 9 hikers had their own dreams, aspirations, and struggles, and understanding their personalities and backgrounds can help us to better comprehend the tragedy and the mystery surrounding their deaths. Igor Dyatlov, the leader of the group, was born on January 13, 1936, in Sverdlovsk. He was a bright and ambitious engineering student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute, with a passion for hiking and mountaineering. Dyatlov was known for his careful planning and attention to detail, and he had led several successful hikes in the past. He was also a kind and compassionate leader who cared deeply about the safety of his group. Dyatlov's friends described him as calm, level-headed, and always willing to help others. He had a bright future ahead of him, and his death was a devastating loss to his family and friends. Yuri Doroshenko was born on March 12, 1938, in Sverdlovsk. He was a student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute, studying to become a civil engineer. Doroshenko was an experienced skier and hiker, and he was known for his cheerful attitude and his ability to keep the group morale high. He was close friends with Igor Dyatlov, and the two had planned the expedition together. Doroshenko's family described him as a kind and generous young man who loved the outdoors and was always looking for new adventures. Yuri Krivonishenko was born on February 7, 1938, in Sverdlovsk. He was a student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute, studying to become a mechanical engineer. Krivonishenko was an experienced hiker who had completed several winter expeditions, and he was known for his physical strength and endurance. He was also a talented musician who played the guitar and enjoyed singing. Krivonishenko's friends described him as a fun-loving and adventurous young man who was always up for a challenge. Lyudmila Dubinina was born on May 12, 1938, in Sverdlovsk. She was a student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute, studying to become a biologist. Dubinina was the only woman in the group, and she was known for her intelligence, determination, and love of nature. She was an experienced skier and hiker, and she had dreamed of completing the Ural hike for years. Dubinina's family described her as a kind and caring young woman who was passionate about her studies and her love of the outdoors. Alexander Kolvatov was born on November 16, 1934, in Sverdlovsk. He was a geologist who had a deep knowledge of the Ural Mountains and their terrain, which made him an invaluable asset to the expedition.